really wanted to have a way of describing to people a way of understanding the difference between your normal brain and what happens when your brain is on trauma. And that word can be a little bit triggering, but recognizing that there's big T traumas, that, kind of the huge things that we would see as trauma, and there's little t traumas. And so just recognizing that the impact to our functioning can be the same, regardless of the size. And it's really how we interpret the event. And so what I came up with was a little analogy. And so it's basically, back in the 70s, there was a Say No to Drugs commercial. And it was, this is your brain. It was a frying pan, and this is your brain on drugs. And this is similar in the sense of, literally our brain can be fried when we've been exposed to trauma. And so if we imagine the brain and the body and as an office building, okay? And so, this is the lovely person here. And we can imagine the higher we go up, the different stages of, or the different floors of the office building. And so the top floor, traditionally, is the lawyer's office, right? Because they can afford the square footage. And so we're gonna imagine, Camille, as you're the head lawyer, right? And so you're kind of got the corner suite, and that's kind of tucked away back here. And everyone within the office has particular jobs. Okay, so if somebody comes up the elevator, they would step off that elevator and they would see just this beautiful oak desk, right? And somebody off the street can't just walk in and have a meeting with you, right? And so they come off the street, they have to talk to the receptionist. The receptionist's job is to actually filter out most of the things that happen in the office. And so if we imagine our brains, the reality is that we may take in 5% or less of the stimulus that we take in. The sights, the smells, the touch. And so our body's continually trying to figure out what's important and what's not important, just like that receptionist is, right? And so who's going to be the client that is going to kind of provide our firm with the best money and also the pro bono and all of that. And so we kind of recognize that the role here is a gatekeeper. There you go. You can tell I love to write messy. Now the other piece is, we recognize that in order to organize the office, right, we have many people behind the scenes that you wouldn't necessarily see, right? So like an executive secretary who would make sure that everyone's coordinated and all the filing is done properly. You've got accounting people. You've got, in a large firm, many different lawyers who are kind of supplementing the practice. And the other piece that's really important to recognize is that you also have 21st century slaves, which are called interns. Basically people who have the opportunity of working in a fancy law firm for next to no pay. And so they're eager and keen. And so what's the name of your intern? Let's just throw a name out there and give me a name of an intern that you would. Dan, oh my goodness, okay. So Dan is trying to please you. And he comes in every morning at 5 o'clock before you do. He tries to do everything behind the scenes. He's only actually met you once or twice. And so most of his work is either with the office manager people or the other lawyers in the firm. And one morning Dan comes in and he's running and he, it's 11 o'clock and he's hungry. So he puts a bagel in the office kitchen and, turns the timer on. And all of a sudden he hears you calling him. Dan, I need you. So he runs out. And unbeknownst to him, the timer to the toaster isn't working. And so that bagel toasts and toasts and toasts, and it's a closed kitchen. And eventually what happens is it engulfs in flame, right? It becomes all smoky and engulfs in flame. And as we know, what typically would occur then is the smoke detector goes off. Everyone has to evacuate the building, right? And so that's essentially what happens when we experience kind of a critical event, a significant event. Now, we need to recognize, right, in your day, you may just have a small tea event, and it's just a burnt bagel that you're dealing with. The reality, though, is it's still impacting the office. It's still going to lead to disruption of the jobs that are going on in the office. And it's really not a judgment as far as how significant event it is. Really what we're looking at is how does it affect the office itself, and normalizing what's going on for you. One of the expressions that we have is you are having, regardless of the reaction, you are having a normal reaction to an abnormal event. And that is what the key piece is what's happening to me. Now, let's imagine and continue with this analogy a little bit more so that we can kind of understand what happens over time. And so let's say the entire office is evacuated, and eventually they get the all clear. But, you know, the fire department's been there. There might be smoke damage. There might be water damage if there was an actual fire. And what's going on with the information? Well, the building's evacuated. The reality is, instead of 5% of the stuff getting into the office, 95% of the stuff comes in. And so that then becomes a backlog of stuff. And so, you know, most likely you would delegate a few people to kind of look through all of the materials. And the other piece is, you know, you would say that smoke detector is a little bit too sensitive, a little bit too not sensitive enough. And so you get your maintenance person to kind of crank up the sensitivity. But as they crank up the sensitivity, they break the screw. So now all of a sudden they can't adjust it back. Okay? And so as your key people are sorting through the paperwork, right? They're getting frustrated. They're going, what's good? What do we keep? What do we throw away? I don't know, you know, this is all gobbledygook. Some stuff is wrecked with water. And they're at a standstill. And the office isn't functioning properly. And so at one point, you know, they say, well, this isn't working for us. And the frustration actually can lead some workers to just check out for the day and say, forget about this. I'm having a martini lunch and I'm disappearing. I'm just going to check out. And that's a very normal reaction to feeling overwhelmed. The other thing that can happen is every time the person kind of goes through that frustration, they just come to a dead stop. And so eventually you may ask your maintenance man to just gather all the material and stuff it in any available filing cabinet in the office. So it might be your filing cabinet in the desk. It might be a few filing cabinets in the storage closet. Just to get rid of it because they want the office to be functional. And at some point, you know, it's distracting because every time they go and they look for something or go to file something, this can of worms pops out. And every time the can of worms pops out, the office becomes dysfunctional again. Sometimes to the point of evacuation and everyone having to leave. But the reality is it's always impacting the functionality of the office building. And that's just a logical outcome of the event, the fire. As I said before, the other piece to it is the smoke detector now is on hypersensitivity, right? So it doesn't actually take much to trigger a response, to trigger an evacuation. And so the only response then is to take all the filing cabinets And the maintenance person screws them shut to say, we can't handle this anymore. This is distracting, which is a classic response, a symptom of avoidance, of stuffing and disconnecting. And that's a really good short-term strategy. It can become more of a challenge over time, because what happens to not only the materials that were stuffed in the drawer, but everything behind that drawer no longer becomes accessible because it's screwed shut. And that's why it can appear that a person's world can get smaller and smaller and smaller, especially when they face multiple incidents, where all of a sudden the tolerance isn't such that it's hard to even cope with basic things in life. And the curiosity then is, where do I go from there? What do I do with that? And sometimes it's actually having a big office party / work bee, where you get everyone together, and you on a day off you find all the drawers that has stuff, and you start sifting through and figuring out where's the gems, where's the pearls, and what's the garbage. And there are times that a person needs to do that kind of in consultation with a professional, whether it's a pastoral person or a professional counselor, right? Where they find that kind of the group thing doesn't work for them, and it's just a one-to-one connection where they can kind of do the sifting. And it's amazing, here at hospice, lots of the things happen. Lots of the things happen when you're not necessarily being intentional about it. Even sitting down and having tea with somebody, there's lots that is happening behind the scenes. Just normalizing the response, having a regular experience of a regular office day, not having to talk about things that you don't want to talk about or be told how to do a certain thing. Does that
makes sense.
Make sense?
Absolutely.